Hello maker friends, and welcome to my channel. In this video we are going to be embroidering flowers onto our amigurumi doll. We will be using lazy daisy stitches, French knots, and the woven wheel. I will link in the description the PDF pattern for the dolls I will be embroidering, along with some of the supplies I'll be using. To begin, all you'll really need is the thread you will be using and the needle. This is a bent tip metal tapestry needle, which is fairly large, but I'm going to be working on this super bulky weight doll and working with some worsted weight yarn and super bulky thread. So this works great for me, but if you are working on a smaller piece or with thinner thread, you may want a smaller needle. The bent tip is helpful, I feel, when I'm trying to make small stitches. That little extra mobility it gives you is helpful, but you'll choose whatever needle you need for the thread you're using. You'll need some scissors, and then optional is a fabric marker of some type to draw out where you want to make your stitches. This is helpful if you want a visual guide. You will embroider over top of the markings you make, and then any markings that are still showing at the end you can wipe away with a wet rag. And if you do choose to use a marker, I would test it on your piece, and thankfully this girl doesn't have her wig sewn on, so I'm gonna test it right up on top. It's not gonna be seen, but this will make sure that I'm using one that will wipe away easy enough and not leave any marks on my fabric. Some fabrics may not work as well with them, so it's good to test out. But you can see here, this was just a wet cloth and I wiped right away. So now I can be confident that it will work great. If anything's left visible of my marker, it can be wiped right away. The first flower we will make is the daisy flower. We will use the lazy daisy stitch, which I used for the leaves and the petals on the flowers. And then the center of the flower is made with French knots. So I will go through both of those stitches. As I mentioned before, you can work with any thread thickness you would like. These were made with worsted weight yarn. This was made with plush super bulky yarn. The leaves were also made with worsted weight yarn. So grab whatever thread you prefer to work with, and let's get started. The first step is sometimes the hardest for me, and that's choosing your colors. I like to lay them out on the doll and get a visual for how the colors will look together. Sometimes you can't really tell until you look at it with your eyes, and that's the case for me. I think I'm going to go for a classic daisy color combo. But once you have your colors chosen, then you can choose if you want to draw it out, you can with a marker. And of course, another option would be just to freehand it. I'd say at this point, 50% of the time when I freehand it, I have to redo it, but that's just part of the process, and that's okay. Because this is my larger flower, I'm going to be working with worsted weight doubled over, and so that will help me create a little bit more full of a flower rather than just working with one thread. It is helpful if you are able to go make your embroidery stitches into a stitch rather than between two stitches. It'll give you a little more, or quite a bit more, control over size and positioning, and hold your stitches more securely if you're able to go through the middle of a stitch. Obviously, sometimes you can't. Position-wise, it might not work, but whenever possible, that's ideal, especially for the French knots. It gives them more to kind of hold on to. But we pull our thread from off to the side and bring it up where you want the center of your daisy to be. Then we're going to take a look, and I want the top of my petal to come out here. So I'm going to take my needle, insert back where I just came out of, and bring it back out where I want the top of my daisy petal to be. And I want to bring it up in the middle of this loop, that way it catches it. So as we pull it through, you can see this loop is closing down, and this thread is on the inside of that loop, so it will keep it in place and not let it close all the way down. Once I have that pulled down tight, I'm going to take my needle and I'm going to insert it back into the same spot where I came out of before and bring it back to the middle or wherever you want the point of your daisy stitch to be. Now here I'm bringing all of my petals back to this stitch, and I'm going to have them touching my center of the flower here, but if you want you can space those out more so that you can have your petal end before the center. Okay, let's show that again. So now my next petal I'm going to have come out to here. So I'm going to insert my needle back into the hole that I just came out of, and I'm going to bring it out where I want the top of my petal to stop. And as I'm pulling this, I don't want this loop to fully close without bringing my needle through the middle of it so it can hold it. Now if you're working with 2 strands of worsted like I am, they might pull a little differently, so you'll just need to kind of pull your strand individually to make sure they close down kind of together. And then once those look good, we're going to go right back in where we came out of there. And this stitch here will anchor the top of your petal. You will just continue to repeat that around to make your flower. Okay, I'll do one more with this double thread and then I'll switch to a single thread because I think that will be easier to see. But we're going to come and bring our needle out about here. So I'm going to insert back where I came from, and then bring my needle out here, but I'm going to make sure that it comes up in the center of that loop that's closing. That will keep it from closing all the way down. Then I can insert back and come back to the middle. Finish this daisy and then we'll make a smaller one. I'm happy with my flower petals, so I'm actually going to bring my tail, my finishing tail, out the same spot where my beginning tail is. Then I can tie these together to secure them and then weave them in. And one thing I want to mention about weaving in your tails, you want to make sure you leave long enough tails to weave into a considerable amount of stuffing, because that is what will help hold your thread inside your doll. Sometimes if you use too short of a tail or you just kind of poke it in and you don't actually weave it into stuffing, those tails are more likely to come back out. So it is really helpful if you can leave a long tail and then really weave those tails through stuffing. That will help secure them and keep them inside, not really let them poke back out. So my doll has weighted beans at the base, so I want to make sure I avoid those and go through stuffing. And usually if you can feel that resistance, that's a good sign that you're through a good amount of stuffing. And then you can cut those threads and let them pop back inside the body. I am going to be adding other smaller flowers on here. I'm not exactly sure what the layout is going to be exactly yet, so I'll put a leaf on here, but if it's different than the final look, just know that I did some trial and error and had to erase this leaf. I heard somewhere that in landscaping and in art, perfect symmetry is not ideal, and that's really interesting. But it's also helpful because in handmade items, it's really hard to get the exact same thing to happen twice. So it maybe will be like catty corner from each other, or maybe I'll put 2 on one side and 1 on the other. But that's just a little tidbit that I heard somewhere that I always thought was interesting. But anyway, all that to say, I'm going to do a leaf, but hopefully it will be in a good placement. I usually do my flowers first and then the leaves after, but I thought the leaf would be a good way to show you how I do a single thread. So again, we're going to enter somewhere out of the way, off to the side, and bring your needle out where you want your leaf to start. So I'm going to bring this one, let's put him right under the flower. You just want to leave a tail here to secure at the end. Okay. And then deciding where you want the tip of your leaf or petal to be, you're going to insert your needle back where you came out of and bring it out where you want that tip to be, which is here. Now I'm pulling it. You can see my loop here is closing. And I'm just going to bring my needle up through the middle of that to anchor it in place. And if you find that you like the placement, but you want it a little bigger, you can absolutely make another stitch, oops, in the same exact placement and kind of double over what you've already done. I'll do one more this way, bringing it out where you want it to stop. And then insert again back where you came out of and bring it out the middle. If you're going to keep going, I'm going to be done, so I'm going to bring it over here to my beginning tail. If you're curious, this doll has a pull string music cord. That's what this is, hanging out the back of her. So if we pull it, we get a little music. I can already tell that I'm going to want to move those leaves, I think, but that's okay. That's all part of the process. Sometimes we got to do and undo until we love it. So for the French knot, we're going to thread your needle with the color you want and bring it in off to the side. Insert your needle, pull it through, and leave a tail over here to secure at the end. Now, you're going to lay your needle close to your work, and depending on the thickness of yarn you're using and how big you want your French knot to be, you're going to wrap around your hook or your needle. I usually do about 2 times. You can do 3. You can play around with that to see how big of a knot you want. I wrapped twice, and I'm going to use my finger to kind of hold those threads on my needle. I'm going to insert my needle again, but not quite in the same exact spot that I came out of. You want to go just a little over, catch another stitch or a thread, and that will keep your knot from disappearing into your work. So using your finger to kind of hold it there, go ahead and pull your needle through. You can see those 2 wraps stay up above. And you can kind of manipulate it with your finger to get it to lay where you want it. And there is our French knot in the center. You can see each of the daisies that I made is slightly different. 2 of them have 5 petals. This one over here has 6. They're not exactly the same positioning and whatnot, so, but I think that works in its favor, that it lends itself to the handmade look. Plus, in nature, daisies aren't all the same anyway, so I think it works. All right, and here is the final look. I love how the embroidery really makes these dolls look like a Russian stacking doll. I used to have them when I was a little girl, so it's really fun making my own. Now to create the rose, we're going to make a 5-arm star that we are going to weave our thread around. I've seen this called a woven wheel, a wagon wheel, a spider stitch. I'm not really sure it matters. I think they're all kind of the same, but we're gonna start with thread and make our star. Now I don't know if you can see it because it kind of blends in, but I used my fabric marker to give me a guide to stitch in these arms. And depending on how large you want your rose, you will make these arms longer or shorter. Okay, so here are the 5 that I'm going to be weaving around. I'm actually going to pull my thread over here to my beginning tail. I'm going to secure those together because I don't want those arms coming loose while I'm weaving around them. So I'm going to pull my yarn back over here and tie the beginning and the finishing tail of those arms off. Now for this rose, I'm going to be working with the worsted weight yarn, but I'm going to double it up. So I'm going to put my needle in the middle and have 2 threads basically. Now we're going to bring our needle in at the center of your rose. We're going to alternate between going over and under the arms. We're going to work around and around. So we're going to go over this one, under this. And you want to try to pull gently so you're not misshaping your rose. And you can always manipulate the positioning with your fingers as you go. So we went over this one, under this branch. We're going to go over and then under. And we're just going to continue that all the way around. And since I'm working with the double strand, I'm going to just pull gently to make sure my strands are cooperating. I went under that one, so over, under, and we're just going to repeat that round and round. Now here I'm out of thread, but I want to keep going. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be going over this one and under that one. So I'm going to take my thread in right before that spoke. I'm going to go in and just bring my thread out of the way over here, making sure it stays in the shape it's supposed to. I'm going to cut that and go ahead and get a new thread. That will just be one more set of tails that we'll weave in. Now joining our new yarn, I'm going to come out on the other side of the spoke. So I went in here on this side of the spoke. I'm going to bring my needle out just on the other side of that one. That way it'll kind of mimic the look of the thread going under it. I know I have a lot of tails over here, but I'm leaving my starting tail out here so that I can knot those together when I'm done. And we're going to continue on. I went under that, so go over this and under this one. And now that we have all our spokes completely covered, we're going to finish off. Oops. There we go. I went under that spoke, and now I'm going to bring my thread into the body, right near where I came on the other side of that spoke, and bring our finishing tail off over here. Let's see. Oh, this is our starting spot. Right up here, the same spot as our starting tail, so that we can secure those together. And cut this so I have my needle free. And then you can go back with your needle and position the threads as you need to, pulling up or tucking under. You can, if you'd like, since this is a really large rosebud, if you have one this big, you might want to go through with some Fabri-Tac or some kind of fabric glue, and you can actually apply small amounts underneath to help all the threads kind of stay in place. But those wagon wheels do the trick for the most part. You don't really have to worry about your rose getting discombobulated. We're going to tie off all the ends together and weave them in. Now I'm toying around with the idea of doing some type of little vine with maybe some little rosebuds on the sides, maybe like French knot rosebuds, or maybe just some leaves below my rosebud here, like maybe 2 leaves. I'm not sure, but I thought I would just record while I play around and try some different things, and that way you can see what I'm doing for each style. So let's see what we do. I'm going to leave this portion unedited so you can see my full process of trial and error and mistakes along the way if you'd like. If you're not interested in watching the full process, you can skip ahead to the end to see the grand reveal. Alright, here's the final look. I went back through and added some French knot rosebuds throughout, some straight stitches and lazy daisy stitches for the leaves and vines, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. It's always a trial and error process for me, and I rarely get it the way I like it the first try. So hopefully that's encouraging for you in this process, that it's okay if you don't know exactly what you want right away, and if you have to undo and redo, it's all part of the process. Hopefully you enjoy it, and I hope that visual aid was helpful.